Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Everyday Fan Podcast. I'm Gary Sparrow, your host. And, this is just an opportunity to sit down and talk with some sports fans, some diehard fans. Doesn't matter what sport, doesn't matter what team. I just like to talk sports and like to give other people opportunity to do the same. And so if you ever want to be a guest on the show, just reach out to me. You can find me on my TikTok or Facebook pages, send me a message, or you can email me at the everydayfanpodcast@gmail.com. So feel free to reach out and love to have you on as a guest. So today my guest is Phillip Rose. How you doing today,
I'm
Phillip?
doing fine. How are you doing?
Doing great, doing great. I actually had his brother Tim on last week, so good to have he told me about Phillip and what a big sports fan he is. So glad to have him on today. And we're just going to talk a little bit about some different sports, different teams, and everything like that. So, Phil, just kind of fill me in first, right quick. I talked to Tim a little bit about how he got to be a big sports fan, and how about you? Was it a family thing as well?
Well, sort of. I really didn't follow. I'm legally and nearly blind, a little bit of vision in one eye, but I didn't follow. Tim was about 6 years younger than I am, but I didn't really follow sports until about late 1978. I started getting into the football, a little bit Kentucky football, and then
Okay,
and then I started following baseball in 1979. The Reds and Braves a little bit. Now, when about that time, I was like. In '78, I was 11 and Tim was 5, and Dad would, in the backyard, would hit balls to us with a baseball bat. They hit balls to us, and sometimes Tim could see better than I could, so it was easier for him to get them. I couldn't really judge him coming, but he did a thing in about 1979. He was doing a lot of woodworking, so he made a baseball board. And I don't have it anymore, but like it was a board, and it had like the center, left field, center fielder, right fielder, third baseman, second baseman, shortstop, and first base, pitcher and catcher. We would put our men out in the field. He had little things that were like men you would put out, and then you had a thing you would spin, and it would say like you made an out, you did a single, a double, a triple, and then you would put your man. Like if you got a double, you'd put him on second base. If you got a walk, you put
oh,
and I enjoyed playing that. Plus, I had a in Atari, I had a little baseball game that was like that had a double A batteries. I don't have it anymore. It's been many years, but in the early '80s, I had that. You would play both teams, and then it was a beep thing, and it would make a noise, and you would swing and hit it. It was like a board game.
gotcha,
Game
gotcha.
of it. And
That's pretty cool.
I,
That's pretty cool having a homemade baseball game. That's all right. So kind of, when you started following the Reds, I guess that was a little bit after kind of the big red machine, Johnny Bench and Joe Morgan and Tony Perez. Were they still around when you started following the
no,
Reds?
actually, for the first time I heard them was a spring training game in March of '79 on a Saturday. But I went with the church group. The first time I went to a baseball game was June 1st on a Friday night, and the Reds were playing the Phillies, and the Reds won. But it was interesting because it was the first time Pete Rose was coming back to Cincinnati as a Philadelphia Philly. That's the first year.
Oh, okay.
And the Reds won their division that year, but Pittsburgh swept them in 3 games.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, they had some great teams back then. Actually, the first Braves game that I went to in person with my dad, they were playing the Reds. That was back in '74. So, yeah, I got to see all the Hall of Fame Reds players back then, Johnny Bench and Joe Morgan and Tony Perez. They had some really great teams.
Nice.
But so, yeah, that's it. It wasn't too long after that that you kinda got, interested in them as well. So, jumping forward a little bit to this year, I know they're last in their division right now. The Central's a really tough division this year. Everybody's over 500, and they're not too far behind. So,
No.
um, what are you thinking about the team this year? I know Ellie De La Cruz is just unbelievable. He kills the Braves every time they play him. But so, what are your thoughts on the team this year?
Well, the division is really close. Anything can happen. They've been predicted to win the division. I don't know if it will or not, but it's going to be if they stay healthy, it could be a pretty good division, a pretty good chance.
Yeah, I know everybody's pretty close. I think they're like 5 games out or something. But yeah, it looks like it's going to be tough. The Pirates are a lot better than they've been the last few years, and yeah, the Braves kind of helped you out a little bit, beating the Cubs a couple games.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really good. I was kind of looking at the the young guy at first base, Stewart, he's really off to a good start. He's having a really good season so far.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's good. So yeah, we'll see. I'm not sure when the Braves play the Reds, but hopefully they will, have a good series when they play. I'm sure it won't be too long from now. So you follow the Braves too. Tim kind of told me, and you mentioned it too. TBS. That's kind of, when we moved to Atlanta. Of course, we got it locally. We didn't have to have cable to get it. We could just watch it over the antenna. But that's really when I got more into the Braves. Of course, we lived there and got to see every game. You know, Before that, I was a baseball fan, but you'd only see baseball on Saturdays usually.
That's right.
And
On Monday Night Baseball, like on Monday nights when ABC had it during the summer.
exactly, exactly. And that was one of my favorite shows ever. Was This Week in Baseball would come on Saturdays, and you get to see what happened the previous week. I don't know if you remember that show or not, but that was a lot of
A
fun.
little bit. What may have happened, I read this somewhere, I like to keep up with the broadcast information. In the mid-70s, about 75, HBO came on, you had to get a box to get it. Okay, and Ted Turner heard about it, and it was WTCG, then it didn't become WTBS till 1979. So, like,
Right.
76 in December, he put that on satellite, and, a lot now, we didn't get cable in Lexington until 1981, but some of the small rural areas got community antenna systems where they use a VHF channel now, and we get maybe about 8 or 10 channels, and some of them my grandparents live about an hour from here, and I first heard about it in '79 because they had it, but
Okay.
they realized it helped baseball because if Atlanta was, like, going to maybe Cincinnati or St. Louis or something, somebody living in a rural area or something and had a small community antenna system, they could they would see the Braves and come out and watch them. And Ted Turner, the early years of that, he would show them he didn't have a lot of programs, so he would re-show them at 2 or 3 in the morning, so people in other countries at different time zones could see it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, he was definitely a visionary, and I know, when he started all that, a lot of the baseball owners didn't like it because, they were afraid it would hurt their attendance and, they could watch games on TV instead of coming out to the ballpark. And I know there was a lot of pushback, but, he followed through and he really fell into something. Of course, everything now is streaming on cable. You can watch get the MLB network, watch every game, anytime. It's really grown from and all of it came from what he started. So
Yeah,
it's a shame he passed away the other day, but yeah, he definitely was a
he
visionary.
did them through 2007, and we got cable in '81. That's why I wanted for WTBS, and then, of course, we, got WGN about a year later, and I went to the first I've been to a few games in Atlanta, but I went to one in June of '97. That was the first year of Turner Field, and it was the first year of interleague play. I watched Atlanta play Baltimore. The Orioles beat them, but it was a Saturday afternoon game. It was sold out, but my brother and I were able to get some tickets.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I actually went to the last game at Fulton County Stadium because my dad actually went to the very first game at Fulton County Stadium back in '66. So when he told me that, and he had the ticket stub and everything, and I found out late in the year in '96, of course, they built the Olympic Stadium and changed it over to Turner Field. And so, yeah, I got his tickets to the very last regular season game at Fulton County Stadium. So so yeah, I was all around the Braves at that time.
Yeah, that's
But that's interesting. I wasn't sure. I didn't know what year they started interleague play, but
yeah, that was
yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, I remember that happened. That was my Monday, September 23rd, 1996. I remember watching I think I watched that game, but see, they clinched the day before, clinched the division, and the announcers were talking about it was good that they were gonna play the last game, and they'd already clinched their division. They didn't have to worry about that.
Right, right, and they had a kind of a tribute to all the players that had, come through there that were still around. That was really a neat night. I was glad I was able to get those tickets.
Yeah.
But yeah, Braves are off to a great start. I think the Reds are gonna be okay too. It's that division might come down to the very end, but they have a lot of talent over there. So looking forward to them playing later this year. So you
I
got to
followed the
be. Let's
80
go ahead.
I'm sorry I interrupted. I followed the Braves to '82 to '84. That's when I first started getting into it, when Joe Torre was a manager. Of course, they won it in '82, and they had a special "It's a Long Way to October," and then in '83, they finished second, a tale of two seasons, and then in '84, they had a special on TBS, Behind the Scenes, and then I've got their, like, '91 Miracle Season VHS tape, '92 Lightning Strikes Twice, and the Win It All in '95, and there was a company called Kestrel Communications, How the West Was Won, that put out a 1993 video, about 30 minutes, and it was called How the West Was Won. Until when he was down in Atlanta, he got me there. He went over and got it, and because he went, they gave him two tapes, like two tapes instead of one tape, and I got that put on DVD. It didn't have a copyright on it, so I think a local company
Oh,
put it out.
wow.
How the West Was Won.
Nice. Yeah, those were some really good teams. I actually remember that '82 team because they started out the season 13. They won 13 straight games, which was a record at that time to start a season. And after the 12th game, they were on the road and they flew back into Atlanta. And me and a buddy of mine, we went to the airport and there was a big crowd. That's back when you could go to the gate without going through security. And so, yeah,
Right.
there was a big crowd at the gate when the Braves came back in and got to, see him get off the plane and, cheer him on and everything. So that was, and then once they won the division, I actually went and bought World Series tickets. They went ahead and sold, the the championship series and World Series tickets right after the season. And I bought World Series tickets. Unfortunately, they lost to the Cardinals in the championship series there, so I didn't get to use them. But yeah, I had World Series tickets for '82 just waiting. But that was a good team. Dale Murphy, of course, that was his Braves team, Bob Warner and all those guys. But yeah, that was a fun time as well.
And they had a game in '91. They were still a game out at this time. It was the last week of the season. They were 2 games out, and they had to go to Houston and won a 3-game series on a weekend, 2 come from behind wins, and then they were in Cincinnati on October 1st, '91. It was a Tuesday, and somebody hit a grand slam for the Reds, but they had a 6-0 lead after 1. The Braves were still 1 game out then, and the Braves kept coming back, and Dave Justice struck a 2-run home run in the 9th inning. It was 6-5 Cincinnati at the time, and Skip Carey said, "Braves lead, Braves lead. Got a bar from you, Dad. Holy cow." And of course, Chicago Cubs, but they got a newspaper clipping the next day about a couple in Anderson, South Carolina. It was probably about 9:30, 10 o'clock, or 10:30 when that was hitting. The lady at the house went to bed. Her husband started yelling, "Get out, get out, get out." And she thought there was a burglar and dialed 911. Uh, and then the next
Oh,
night,
wow, that's
the
funny.
Braves, the Braves beat the Reds the next night, and the Dodgers were playing the Padres, and the Dodgers had a 2 or 3 run lead, and the Padres scored 6 runs in the 8th inning or something. And Tom Lasorda said, "If we lose this game, that'll be the game I'll remember." And of course, the Braves came home against Houston, won 2 games, and the Dodgers couldn't win anything at San Francisco, so they clinched that weekend in '91.
Yep. Yeah, that was the worst of first season. That was a good one. That World Series against the Twins too was something else. That was one of the most entertaining World Series. I just hate we couldn't pull that one out.
Yeah, Vince Scully talked about that. He called that, and he said it was one of the best. And I did really enjoy it when they won their first 13. Most of those that they started in San Diego, and then they had a road trip where they went to Cincinnati and Houston and overcame some big deficits in 2 or 3 of those games during that
Yeah,
13.
that
I
was a
know
really
started in '82.
that was a really fun team. They went through a pretty big slump right after that, but they did manage to come
I
back
know,
and
and
win
then
the division.
they lost 6 games to Houston because you play teams inside your division 3 times each time. So they lost 3 straight in Atlanta to Houston and 3 straight in Houston. They with 10 games left in '82, they were 3 games out, and somebody said they could blame on ESPN, they could blame it on not being able to beat Houston if they don't win the division, but they did. The Dodgers got into a slump.
Yeah, yeah, they did, and you know the playoffs against the Cardinals actually. Unfortunately, Phil Niekro, of course, he was their top pitcher. He was the ace of the staff, and he was pitching the first game against St. Louis, and I think it was a shutout through 3 or 4 innings. He ended up getting rained out, and so they kind of lost his start,
Yeah.
and that's kind of yeah. Then they lost 3 straight after that. So never know what might have happened if they
Yeah,
could have got that first game in.
I know now what they do is they just if it's that they don't start it from the beginning, they just stop it, and, I mean, they
Right.
just stop it and then they the next day or so, which I think is better.
Yeah, suspend the game and then not normally the same pitcher can't pitch unless they it's sometimes they suspend a game and don't pick it up till next time the team's in town or something like that if it's an out of town series.
I think
So let me ask you about the Reds, following the Reds all these years. What's your favorite Reds team?
well, Marty Brennaman, their announcer, retired in about 7 years ago, and, of course, they won it in '75 and '76, I don't remember that, but Marty Brennaman said his favorite, which I agree is my favorite, 1990. They led from wire to wire, they were never out of first place, and there was no clicks, everybody got along, and, of course, they swept the Oakland A's, remember in the 4th game, Billy Hatcher and Eric Davis were injured. One of them was going after a ball in the outfield, and one of them was hit on the hand. And so two of the main players that had about 13 hits were injured, but Rio kept pitching, and they scored 2 runs in the 8th inning to win it. And that's what happened.
Yeah, that was a tough team. That was the one of their best. So yeah, I agree. I think Barry Larkin was the shortstop on that team.
That's right.
Yeah, I always liked him. I actually went used to work at Eastern Airlines when I was real young, but a friend of mine that worked there went to high school in Ohio, and he played against Barry Larkin. He was a big baseball guy, but he played against Barry Larkin in high school. And I don't know, ever since then he told me that I just kind of followed his career and yeah, Hall of Famer, great shortstop.
I heard one time, I heard Pete Van Wert, he did some kind of, I saw it on YouTube. He was talking to a group about the Braves, probably about 2010 or 2011. Talking about all the teams and, he said that it was good. They won it in '95. He said it was a lot more enjoyable when they started winning, and that he said one time when he first started, and that he and Skip Carey started about 1976 when Ted Turner bought the team. They say that he may have saved it in Atlanta when he bought it in January of '76. But Pete Van Wieren was saying he was on the air one time, and he said, "I want to hear is the voice of the Braves, Ernie Johnson." And Ernie Johnson Sr. said, "You don't have to say that. We're all sort of a team." He made a comment about when Henry Aaron hit that home run to break Babe Ruth's record, Milo Hamilton was on the call, and he apparently toward the end he he had to be at the mic when he hit the home run. So probably several times he batted the last several games or so. He had to be at the mic, and Pete Ernie really didn't like that because he was just sort of arrogant and everything. And I heard in '75, his last year, he really criticized the fans for not showing up there. But
Uh, yeah, he was different. But yeah, I do remember that. I was actually watching on TV when we lived in Kansas actually when that happened and when Aaron hit the home run. But but yeah, they had some after that, they had some really rough goes there in the late '70s. They weren't real good.
or
And,
'90, they were last or not next to last from '85 to '90.
well, it really was in the '80s too when I was old enough to start driving and going to games. That was one of the things, I guess, a benefit of them being so bad. You could go to a game, buy a cheap ticket and then go sit wherever you wanted to because there wasn't, 5, 6,000 people in the stands.
Yeah.
But, always much more fun when they're winning, so
Joe,
glad that, Bobby Cox turned things around.
yeah, he was fired in '81. In '80 and '81, they weren't that good, but Joe Torre had a good team in '82, and in '83, he finished second. I think after '84, they realized he finished about 10 or 11 games out to behind San Diego. They realized things weren't gonna change, and then they had 2 or 3 different managers, and then, I think it's good they got Bobby Cox back as general manager. They said it was a 5-year plan, and one thing Terry Pendleton said in 1990, I saw on a tape, he said one thing about he wanted somewhere to play Jeff Blau, so they worked on his fielding because he could swing the bat, and Terry Pendleton said, "You need to improve that dang infield. The infield's the worst." So they started working on that about '91, improving the infield.
Yeah, actually, I mentioned that the other day. John Sherholtz came from Kansas City,
Yeah,
and the Kansas City groundskeeper was Ed Mangum, and he brought him to Atlanta with him.
I didn't know.
And you're absolutely right. The infield after that has been immaculate ever since.
Yeah,
He's probably the best in the game, and they used to have the monster trucks and Supercross. They'd have all that at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, bring all the dirt in, and, they have some, fan events where you could go out on the field, and I remember going out there, looking at the field going, "Well, heck, I've played on some little league fields that look better than this." But, he really changed, and I think that really helped him a lot. And, if you're gonna build your team around pitching like they did, you gotta have good defense, and it's hard to have good defense on a field that looked like it did in Atlanta
I remember not
during this.
in 1980, first time I started really following the Braves some, but that's before we got cable on WSB. They were playing games on Sunday night, like in June or July and August. I could pick up in the evening 750 WSB really good, and
Right.
but after 1980, they really didn't do that. I guess it didn't work too well. Probably maybe they didn't get a lot of fan support, but John Sherrill said he planned to build the Royals of the South, and that's what he did. Of course, nobody thought at that time they would win. They said, and I remember on the NBC network, because NBC was doing the World Series in '95. They said this team will probably be good for several years. And of course, nobody believed it. In '91, they would be win 14 division titles. I know in 1976, when Ted Turner bought the team, he said the Reds had won it in '75. So he sent everybody, all the season ticket holders, Valentine cards. It says Rose is a Red. Talking about Pete Rose. Morgan's won 2. They finished first, like we need to, or something like that.
Well, it took them a while, but they finally made it.
Yeah, they got they got some players, and that's what Terry Pendleton told them in spring training at '91. He said, told the people, he said, "You're going to see a different team." He told them that in spring training in '91. Was Ted?
He was a big catalyst. Yeah, of course, he won the MVP that year,
Yeah,
and, he really helped turn that team around as well. Well, one thing about probably the biggest heartbreak I had with the Braves was the '96 World Series against the Yankees
yeah,
when they were up 2 games to 1, looked like they had the 4th game in hand, and Jim Lawrence hit that home run against Wohlers,
yeah.
and they ended up losing that game, and that kinda turned the whole series. So,
Yep.
thinking about that and you being the Cincinnati Reds fan, what's your biggest heartbreak as far as some of the Reds teams that you've watched over the years?
Well, now they won their division in 2012, and in the first round they played a best of 5. And in 2010, they won their division, but Philadelphia swept them. But in 2012, they played the best of 5 in the first round. They played the first 2 games in San Francisco in 2012. Cincinnati won them both. Then Cincinnati came home and lost 3 to San Francisco. And
Mm.
one thing about the Atlanta Braves '96 team, you may remember they were down 3 games to 1 to the Cardinals, and they won
They were.
that they won 3 games, and after winning the first 2 at Yankee Stadium, they had outscored their opponents 48-2, and people that there was a rain out, so they played on a Monday night at Yankee Stadium. So people waited till 2 or 3 in the morning to welcome them home because they didn't have an off day. And who would have thought the Yankees would win 3 straight and then win Game 6? But that's what happened.
I know it. Thought they had that one, and that really would have changed the whole dynamic of, that because everybody said they should have won more World Series, but, winning them back to back really would have changed, it's already a great team, but it really would have changed a lot and would have changed how the Yankees were seen as well because they kinda ended up being the team of the '90s.
Yeah.
Uh, of course, they had the rematch in '99, which I think is one of Bobby Cox's best managing jobs because they lost. That's when Andres Galarraga was with him, and he ended up being out the whole year with cancer. They lost Eddie Perez earlier in the year, just a lot of injuries, and they still ended up making it back to the World Series.
Yeah.
And in the first game was a great game. John Smoltz pitched a great game, but they ended up losing in extra innings, I think it was. And then that was kind of they were done after that. It was like the Yankees ended up sweeping them in that World Series, but he did a great job managing that team and getting them there with all the injuries they had that year.
And then in '93, of course, they overcame that big deficit against the Giants that were 10 games out in July, and they were up 2 games to 1. They had scored like 14 runs in one inning and game and about 9 runs in the next game. They were up 2 games to 1, but of course they lose 3 straight, and their close games like 2-1 or 4-3 or something. And they lose 3 straight, and then, of course, the World Series, they said in Toronto was about as good as they were when the '92 season. Of course, all those games were decided by 1 run. Toronto won, and, of course, '91 was the one they probably should I think Dave Justice or one of the players said in '91, "We probably just let this get away. We probably had the better team." But
Yeah, I think so too. There was a couple plays. Kirby Puckett hit a big home run. You had the Kent Herbick play at first base where he pulled Gann off the bag.
you know,
Lonnie Smith made a in that 7th game, Lonnie Smith made a base running error, which, if he scores and it probably doesn't go to extra innings.
should the
Um,
should the umpire have watched him in that, or was he watching the umpire or not? The third base coach, you remember?
it was actually, I think, the shortstop that kinda deked him. He was 'Cause I think he was on first, and it was a double that was hit, and he kinda stopped at second 'cause one of the it might have been Chuck Knobloch when he was playing
Yes.
second baseman. He might have kinda deked him like the, ball was coming in or something, and he may have been running on the play,
Yeah.
and he acted like the catcher was throwing it. There was somebody that deked him, and he kinda stopped at second and then took off, and by then it was too late.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was something like that. But, yeah, that would have been the run they needed to win it in 9 innings.
Right.
But, yeah, just some great teams and great games back then. But, yeah, hopefully, like I said, I like the Reds okay, as long as they're not playing the Braves, so I'll pull for the Reds for you to win that division. But, hopefully they'll continue to be good the rest of the year.
I hope the Braves will too, and maybe they'll get in the World Series. And also, of course, I always liked it. Also like it when the Cubs won their 2016 World Series. I followed that one. That was one I really liked.
Yeah, that was good, and Jason Hayward, of course, came up with the Braves. I think he was a big part of that team,
Yeah.
and he just retired earlier this year. He decided to retire, but, yeah, I was glad the Cubs finally, kinda broke the streak there and won, kinda like the Red Sox, when they did. They're a little down this year. They're playing the Braves this weekend, so hopefully the Braves can take advantage while they're kinda having a down season so far.
Yeah.
Well, Philip, I tell you what, we're coming up on about 30 minutes, so I was gonna get into a little football, a little Kentucky football and college football, but I tell you what, we'll call it right now, and I'll bring you back when we get a little closer to football season. How does that
Okay,
sound?
that sounds good. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you so much, Philip, and we'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome.
All right. Bye.
Bye.